I promise to love and cherish you. I promise to love and cherish you.
Sarah never imagined that planning the perfect wedding would lead her to question everything she believed about love. As she stood in the grand ballroom, watching the man she had secretly loved for 3 years exchange vows with another woman, she realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that never get their happy ending. But what Sarah didn't know was that this wedding would change everything, and that the bride's mysterious last-minute confession would turn her world completely upside down. Before we dive into Sarah's incredible journey of love, heartbreak, and unexpected second chances, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us bring you more captivating romantic drama stories every week. Now, let's discover how one wedding changed everything for Sarah Matthews. Sarah Matthews had built her reputation as the most sought-after wedding planner in Manhattan through sheer determination and an eye for perfection that bordered on obsessive. At 28, she had orchestrated over 200 weddings, each one more elaborate and beautiful than the last. Her clients trusted her implicitly, knowing that Sarah would create their dream day without fail. What they didn't know was that behind her professional smile and meticulous planning lay a heart that had been quietly breaking for 3 years. The source of Sarah's hidden anguish was David Chen, a successful architect who had first walked into her office on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. He had been looking for someone to plan his sister's wedding, and Sarah had fallen for him the moment he smiled and complimented her portfolio. Over the months of planning his sister's celebration, they had grown close, sharing late-night conversations over coffee and developing what Sarah believed was a genuine connection. But David had been dating someone else at the time, a brilliant lawyer named Rebecca, and Sarah had convinced herself that her feelings were one-sided. She had thrown herself into her work, hoping that keeping busy would help her move on. When David's relationship with Rebecca had ended, Sarah had allowed herself to hope, but before she could find the courage to tell him how she felt, he had started dating someone new. That someone new was Victoria Sterling, a successful marketing executive with platinum blonde hair and the kind of confidence that commanded attention in every room she entered. Victoria was everything Sarah felt she wasn't: bold, outspoken, and seemingly fearless when it came to love. When David had called Sarah 6 months ago to ask if she would plan his wedding to Victoria, Sarah's heart had shattered, but her professionalism had kicked in immediately. She had quoted him her standard rate, scheduled their initial consultation, and spent the next 24 hours crying in her apartment before pulling herself together and deciding to give David and Victoria the most beautiful wedding she had ever created. If she couldn't have David's love, she could at least give him the perfect day to celebrate his marriage to someone else. The wedding planning process had been both torture and blessing for Sarah. Every meeting with David and Victoria reminded her of what she couldn't have, but it also allowed her to spend time with David, even if it was under circumstances that broke her heart a little more each time. Victoria had very specific ideas about what she wanted, and she wasn't shy about expressing them. She wanted everything to be grand, expensive, and impressive. The wedding wasn't just a celebration of love, it was a statement about success and status. David seemed happy enough with Victoria's choices, though Sarah sometimes caught glimpses of something in his eyes that looked almost like resignation. She told herself she was imagining things, projecting her own hopes onto situations where they didn't belong. David had chosen Victoria, and Sarah needed to accept that and find a way to move forward with her own life. The venue Victoria had selected was the Crystal Ballroom at the Plaza Hotel, with its soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. The guest list included 300 of New York's most influential people, from business executives to politicians to celebrities. The flowers alone cost more than most people's annual salary, with elaborate arrangements of white orchids, roses, and peonies flown in from 3 different countries. Sarah had coordinated every detail with her usual precision. The ceremony would take place in the ballroom's smaller adjoining space, decorated with thousands of white flowers and flowing silk draping. The reception would follow in the main ballroom, with a 10-course dinner prepared by the hotel's award-winning chef and dancing to a full orchestra. Victoria had insisted on wearing a dress that cost more than a car, custom-made by a designer who typically dressed royalty. As the wedding day approached, Sarah found herself working longer hours and sleeping less. She told herself it was just the usual pre-wedding stress that affected all her big events. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She was dreading the moment when she would have to watch David promise to love Victoria forever, knowing that she would never hear those words directed at her. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of perfect September weather that made New York City look like a movie set. Sarah arrived at the plaza at 6 in the morning to oversee the final preparations. The florists were already at work, transforming the ballroom into a garden of white blooms. The caterers were setting up in the kitchen, and the musicians were conducting their sound check. Everything was proceeding exactly according to Sarah's carefully planned timeline, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Victoria had been unusually quiet during their final walkthrough the day before, and when Sarah had asked if everything was all right, Victoria had given her a strange look and said that she was just thinking about how different her life would be after today. At the time, Sarah assumed Victoria was referring to the normal pre-wedding jitters that most brides experienced. Now, as she watched the final preparations come together, she wondered if there had been something more to Victoria's mood. David arrived at 11, looking handsome in his custom-tailored tuxedo, but more nervous than Sarah had ever seen him. His best man and groomsmen were with him, laughing and joking as they got ready in one of the hotel's luxury suites. Sarah checked in with them briefly to ensure they had everything they needed, and David thanked her for all her hard work. He looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah thought she saw something in his expression that looked almost like sadness. But before she could analyze it further, one of his groomsmen called him away to take photos, and the moment passed. Victoria was getting ready in the bridal suite with her mother, sister, and 4 bridesmaids. When Sarah knocked on the door to check on their progress, she was invited in to see Victoria in her dress. The bride looked absolutely stunning, like something out of a fairy tale, but there was something in her eyes that Sarah couldn't quite read. Her mother was fussing over every detail, adjusting the veil and smoothing the dress's intricate beadwork. Her sister was taking photos with her phone, chattering excitedly about how perfect everything looked.
The bridesmaids were getting their final touch-ups from the makeup artist, their pink silk dresses creating a beautiful backdrop for Victoria's white gown. But Victoria herself seemed oddly subdued. She smiled and responded to everyone's compliments, but Sarah noticed that the smile never quite reached her eyes. When their eyes met in the mirror, Victoria held her gaze for a moment longer than seemed natural, and Sarah wondered again if something was wrong. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 4 o'clock, and by 3:30, the guests had begun to take their seats. Sarah moved through the crowd like a graceful ghost, solving last-minute problems and ensuring that everything ran smoothly. She coordinated with the photographer, double-checked the music cues with the string quartet, and confirmed that the officiant was ready to begin. At 10 minutes before 4, she knocked on the bridal suite door to let Victoria know it was time for her final preparations. Victoria's mother and sister stepped out to take their seats, leaving Victoria alone with Sarah for the first time all day. Victoria stood before the full-length mirror, looking every inch the perfect bride. But when she turned to face Sarah, her expression was troubled. and Sarah could see that her hands were trembling slightly. Victoria told Sarah that she needed to ask her something, and her voice was unsteady in a way that made Sarah immediately alert. She asked if Sarah thought it was possible to love someone and still marry someone else. The question caught Sarah completely off guard, and she wasn't sure how to respond. Sarah tried to give a diplomatic answer, saying that she believed people could love different people in different ways, and that marriage was about choosing to build a life with someone who shared your values and goals. But Victoria shook her head and said that wasn't what she meant. Victoria then asked Sarah if she had ever been in love with someone she couldn't have, someone who was with another person or unavailable in some way. Sarah's heart began to race, unsure where this conversation was heading, but Sarah answered honestly that she had experienced unrequited love before. Victoria nodded, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. Then she said something that made Sarah's world tilt on its axis. Victoria told Sarah that she knew about her feelings for David, that she had known for months, and that she understood because she was in love with someone else too. Sarah felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. She started to deny Victoria's claim, but Victoria held up her hand and said there was no point in pretending. Victoria explained that she had seen the way Sarah looked at David, the way she brightens when he walked into a room, the way she remembered every detail about his preferences and opinions. Victoria said that she had initially felt threatened by Sarah's obvious feelings, but over time she had come to understand that Sarah's love for David was genuine and selfless. Sarah had never tried to interfere in their relationship or undermine Victoria in any way. Instead, she had channeled her feelings into creating the most beautiful wedding possible for the man she loved and the woman he had chosen. Sarah was stunned into silence, not knowing how to respond to Victoria's revelations. But Victoria wasn't finished. She told Sarah that watching her sacrifice her own happiness for David had made Victoria realize that she was about to make a terrible mistake. Victoria explained that she cared about David and enjoyed his company, but she wasn't in love with him the way Sarah was. She had been dating David because he was successful, stable, and would make a good husband on paper. But over the past few months, she had fallen in love with someone else entirely. The someone else Victoria revealed was her business partner, Marcus, with whom she had been working closely on a major campaign. What had started as a professional relationship had gradually become something deeper, but Victoria had convinced herself that her feelings weren't real because Marcus didn't fit the image of the man she had always thought she would marry.
Marcus came from a working-class background and had built his career through talent and determination rather than connections and privilege. He was passionate about causes Victoria had never thought much about, like environmental sustainability and social justice. He challenged her in ways that David never had, pushing her to think about the world differently and to consider what really mattered to her. Victoria told Sarah that she had been trying to ignore her feelings for Marcus because she thought David was the more logical choice. David was handsome, successful, and came from the same social circle as Victoria's family. Everyone expected them to get married, and Victoria had convinced herself that love would grow over time. But as her wedding day had approached, Victoria had realized that she couldn't go through with marrying David while being in love with someone else. It wouldn't be fair to David, and it certainly wouldn't be fair to herself. She had been trying to work up the courage to call off the wedding for weeks, but the pressure from her family and the enormity of the preparations had made it seem impossible. Seeing Sarah's selfless devotion to David had finally given Victoria the courage to face the truth about her own feelings. If Sarah could love David enough to plan his wedding to another woman, then Victoria owed it to all of them to be honest about what she really wanted. Sarah listened to Victoria's confession with a mixture of shock, confusion, and a growing sense of hope that she tried desperately to suppress. She asked Victoria what she planned to do.
though she thought she already knew the answer. Victoria said that she was going to tell David that she couldn't marry him, that it wouldn't be fair to either of them. She knew it would be devastating for him and embarrassing for both their families, but she believed it would be worse to go through with the marriage built on a foundation of settling rather than love. Sarah's mind was reeling as she tried to process everything Victoria had told her. She felt terrible for David, who would be humiliated in front of 300 guests, but she also felt a surge of admiration for Victoria's courage in choosing honesty over convenience. Victoria asked Sarah if she thought she was doing the right thing, and Sarah found herself in the impossible position of having to give relationship advice to the woman who was about to leave the man she loved at the altar. But Sarah knew that Victoria was right. A marriage without love was a disservice to everyone involved, and David deserved to be with someone who loved him completely. Sarah told Victoria that she thought honesty was always the right choice, even when it was difficult. She offered to help Victoria figure out how to handle the situation with as much dignity as possible for everyone involved. Victoria thanked Sarah for her understanding and support, and then asked if Sarah would do something for her. Victoria wanted Sarah to be the one to tell David that she couldn't go through with the wedding. Victoria explained that David respected and trusted Sarah, and that hearing the news from her might be easier for him than hearing it from Victoria directly. Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of being the one to break David's heart, even if it wasn't directly her fault, was almost unbearable. But she also understood Victoria's reasoning, and she realized that this might be the last thing she could do for David as his wedding planner. Sarah agreed to Victoria's request, and they quickly made a plan. Sarah would go to David and explain the situation, while Victoria spoke to her parents and called Marcus to tell him about her decision. They would then work together to inform the guests and figure out how to handle the practical aspects of canceling the wedding.
Sarah left Victoria in the bridal suite and made her way to the groom's preparation room with her heart pounding. She had delivered difficult news to clients before, but never anything like this. She knocked on the door and asked David if she could speak to him privately. David stepped out into the hallway, looking concerned by Sarah's serious expression. He asked if there was a problem with the ceremony preparations, and Sarah took a deep breath before telling him that there was something important they needed to discuss. Sarah explained that Victoria had asked her to speak with him because she was having serious doubts about going through with the wedding. David's face went pale, and he asked Sarah what kind of doubts. Sarah chose her words carefully, explaining that Victoria had realized she wasn't ready for marriage and that she believed it would be unfair to both of them to proceed with the ceremony. David was quiet for a long moment, processing what Sarah had told him. Then he asked if this was Victoria's decision or if someone had influenced her. Sarah assured him that Victoria had come to this conclusion on her own and that she genuinely believed it was the right choice for both of them. David nodded slowly, and Sarah was surprised to see that while he looked hurt and shocked, he didn't seem completely devastated. After another moment of silence, David said that he had sensed something was different about Victoria lately, but he had attributed it to pre-wedding stress. David asked Sarah if Victoria had told her why she was having doubts, and Sarah explained as gently as possible that Victoria had realized she had feelings for someone else. David closed his eyes and leaned against the wall, and Sarah could see him working to process this information. When David opened his eyes again, he asked Sarah a question that caught her off guard. He asked if she thought Victoria was making the right decision. Sarah told him honestly that she believed people should only get married when they were completely certain about their feelings, and that it took courage for Victoria to be honest about her doubts. David looked at Sarah for a long moment, and there was something in his expression that she couldn't quite read. Then he said something that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. David told Sarah that he had been having doubts too, though he had been trying to convince himself they were just normal pre-wedding nerves. David explained that he cared about Victoria and enjoyed spending time with her,
but lately he had been wondering if what he felt for her was really love or just comfort and familiarity. He said that Victoria was beautiful, intelligent, and accomplished, and that everyone expected them to be perfect together, but he had never felt the kind of deep, overwhelming connection that he thought marriage should be based on. Sarah listened to David's confession with growing amazement, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. David continued, saying that he had been comparing his feelings for Victoria to what he had observed between other couples who seemed truly in love, and he had realized that something was missing. David told Sarah that he had actually been thinking about calling off the wedding himself, but he hadn't known how to do it without hurting Victoria or disappointing their families. He said that in a strange way, Victoria's decision had given him the permission he needed to be honest about his own feelings. Sarah asked David what he wanted to do about the guests in the celebration that had been planned. David said that he thought they should make an announcement explaining that the wedding had been called off by mutual agreement and that they should encourage everyone to stay and enjoy the dinner and dancing as a celebration of friendship rather than marriage.
Sarah was impressed by David's grace and maturity in handling such a difficult situation. She offered to help him make the announcement and coordinate with the hotel staff to adjust the evening's plans. David accepted her offer gratefully, and they began to work together to manage the unprecedented situation. Over the next hour, Sarah found herself seeing a side of David that she had never experienced before. Under pressure, he was calm, thoughtful, and considerate of everyone involved. He spoke personally with Victoria to make sure she was all right and to thank her for her honesty. He called both sets of parents to explain the situation before they heard it from anyone else. He worked with Sarah to craft an announcement that would be honest but respectful of everyone's dignity. When it came time to address the guests, David asked Sarah if she would stand with him while he made the announcement. Sarah was surprised by the request, but she agreed to support him in whatever way he needed. David's announcement was brief but heartfelt. He explained that he and Victoria had realized they were not ready for marriage and had mutually decided to call off the ceremony. He thanked everyone for their love and support, and he invited them to stay and celebrate the power of honesty and friendship instead. The guests' reactions were mixed, ranging from shock to disappointment to relief. Some people left immediately, but many stayed, drawn by curiosity and the promise of an expensive meal. The atmosphere was certainly different from what had been planned, but it wasn't unpleasant. There was a sense of having witnessed something authentic and brave. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself working alongside David to ensure that the guests who remained were comfortable and entertained. They moved through the crowd together, answering questions and managing the unusual situation with teamwork that felt natural and effortless. During a quiet moment, David pulled Sarah aside and thanked her for everything she had done to help him through the day. He said that he didn't know how he would have managed without her support and professionalism. Sarah told him that she was glad she could help and that she admired how he had handled such a difficult situation. David looked at Sarah intently and said that going through this experience had made him realize something important about what he wanted in a partner. He said that he wanted to be with someone who would stand by him during difficult times. Someone who understood him well enough to know what he needed even before he asked for it. Someone who challenged him to be his best self while accepting him exactly as he was. As David spoke, Sarah felt her heart beginning to race, but she told herself not to read too much into his words. David continued, saying that he had realized that the person he had just described was someone he already knew. Someone who had been in his life for 3 years and who had just helped him through one of the most challenging days he had ever experienced. David told Sarah that he had been blind to his own feelings for far too long, but that the events of the day had made everything clear. He said that he was in love with Sarah and had been for longer than he had been willing to admit to himself. He had convinced himself that she was out of his league, that she would never be interested in someone like him, and that it was safer to be with someone who felt more attainable. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had dreamed of this moment for 3 years, but she had never imagined it would happen under these circumstances. She told David that she had feelings for him too, but that she was concerned about the timing and whether they were both thinking clearly after such an emotional day. David acknowledged that the timing was far from ideal, but he said that he didn't want to waste any more time being with the wrong person or avoiding his true feelings. He asked Sarah if she would be willing to explore a relationship with him, starting slowly and seeing where their connection might lead. Sarah looked around the ballroom, taking in the elaborate decorations that had been meant to celebrate David's marriage to another woman. And she realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories began in the most unexpected ways. She told David that she would like nothing more than to see what might develop between them.
David smiled for the first time all day, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and made Sarah's heart flutter. He took her hand and said that he thought they should start by finishing the work of managing this unusual celebration together, and then perhaps they could have dinner somewhere quiet and talk about what they both wanted for the future. Sarah agreed, and they returned to their duties as hosts of the strangest wedding reception in Plaza Hotel history. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in the span of a single day. She had woken up that morning preparing to watch the man she loved marry someone else, convinced that she would never have a chance at happiness with him. Now, as she and David worked together to oversee the cleanup and ensure that Victoria was safely on her way to have her own conversation with Marcus, Sarah realized that sometimes the most painful endings could become the most beautiful beginnings. Victoria had indeed called Marcus immediately after the ceremony was canceled, and he had rushed to the hotel to be with her. Sarah had watched them embrace in the lobby, and she could see the genuine love and relief in both their faces. Victoria had made the right choice for everyone involved. As Sarah and David left the plaza together, walking out into the cool September night, David took her hand and told her that he wanted to take things slowly and build their relationship on a foundation of friendship and mutual respect. He said that he had learned from his experience with Victoria that rushing into commitment without fully understanding your own feelings was a mistake he didn't want to repeat. Sarah appreciated David's thoughtfulness and agreed that they should take their time getting to know each other in this new context. They had been friends and professional colleagues for 3 years, but dating would be entirely different, and they both wanted to make sure they were making decisions based on genuine compatibility rather than just relief at finally being able to express their feelings. Over the following months, Sarah and David began dating slowly and deliberately. They had dinner together once a week, went to museums and concerts, took long walks through Central Park, and gradually opened up to each other about their hopes, dreams, and fears. Sarah discovered that David was even more wonderful as a boyfriend than he had been as a friend. He was attentive without being possessive, ambitious without being selfish, and thoughtful in ways that constantly surprised her. David, for his part, found that his feelings for Sarah only deepened as he got to know her better. He loved her creativity and attention to detail, her kindness toward everyone she worked with, her ability to solve problems under pressure, and her quiet strength that had supported him through one of the most difficult days of his life. 6 months after the wedding that never happened, David proposed to Sarah in the same ballroom at the plaza where they had realized they loved each other. He had worked with the hotel to recreate some of the floral arrangements from that memorable day, but this time the flowers celebrated their own love story rather than commemorating a marriage built on settling for less than true love. Sarah said yes immediately, and they began planning their own wedding with the knowledge that they were marrying their best friend and greatest love. Their celebration was smaller and more intimate than the elaborate affair that David had planned with Victoria, but it was perfect because it reflected who they truly were as a couple. Victoria and Marcus attended David and Sarah's wedding as friends. Having built a strong relationship based on shared values and genuine love,
Victoria had taken over Sarah's wedding planning business when Sarah decided to focus on architectural consultation alongside David, and she had found that she had a natural talent for helping other couples create celebrations that reflected their authentic selves rather than just impressive displays. As Sarah stood at the altar looking into David's eyes, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. Sometimes love required patience. Sometimes it required courage. And sometimes it required the wisdom to recognize that the most beautiful love stories were the ones that began with friendship, honesty, and the willingness to choose each other every single day. The wedding planner's secret love had become the foundation for a marriage built on truth, respect, and the kind of deep connection that Sarah had always dreamed of but had never dared to believe she deserved. As David slipped the wedding ring onto her finger and promised to love her for the rest of his life, Sarah realized that sometimes the longest wait led to the most beautiful destination. Their love story became one that Sarah would tell future brides who worried about timing and perfect circumstances. She would remind them that love couldn't be scheduled or planned like a wedding timeline, but that when it was real and true, it would find a way to flourish regardless of the obstacles. And sometimes, she would add with a smile, the most beautiful weddings are the ones that almost never happened at all.